I know that there are some components to this bill, but I want to talk in general terms for voters or people that are looking at a bill like this. How could you explain House Bill 3899 and kind of what it's aiming to do?
So everybody is familiar with what a bond is, right? You have seen school bonds, city bonds, county bonds. When a taxing entity wants to build infrastructure, they're required to go to voters, tell them that they're going to issue bonds, and put a number in the ballot of how much they're going to spend. Unfortunately, Austin chose not to do that when they put Project Connect on the ballot. The ballot language neglected to mention a specific amount for how much they were going to spend, or to say, or to ask permission for them to issue bonds. They did a property tax increase of about 20%, and they're now transferring that money to a non-elected entity called a local government corporation. And they're now claiming that they have the ability to spend as much money as they want into perpetuity on this project. That is clearly in violation of the intent of state law. And honestly, it's an absolute slap in the face to the taxpayers who are struggling with the cost of living in Austin and rising property taxes. So all this bill does is require Austin and Project Connect to do what every other taxing entity in the state is required to do, which is to put an amount on the ballot and ask for permission to use your property taxes to issue bonds.
Gotcha. So it's really like a transparency measure to make sure that, hey, this needs to be set up front and approved by voters.
Absolutely. This is transparency and accountability. And I think it's important that people understand that what Austin did, that was the first time in history that any taxing entity has tried to pull off a stunt like that. So we're not doing anything out of the ordinary. In fact, we're asking them to do exactly what state law has always intended, to be upfront and honest with voters about how much they're going to spend and what the project is going to do. And it's interesting that we're here having this conversation a few years later, and we still don't really have answers to that question. How much is it going to be, and what is the project going to look like? And I think that transparency and accountability is absolutely critical information for voters to have before they make a decision about how much they want to spend on this project.
And I know this bill made it out of committee, and I think it's being brought up tomorrow, right? Am I correct on that?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So I want to bring it to just a couple more, in terms of, we kind of talked about how it relates to Project Connect, but and you've already touched on this, but kind of explain the importance of what that means now. Okay, so we're looking at this, and this would also mean, bringing this back to voters, because of course there's been some things, one of the five, there's choosing one of five now routes that people are basing off of, which are obviously not the same as what people voted on back in 2020. Looking
Right.
at some higher dollars being spent. So, what is the importance to you in terms of also, just bringing that back to voters? Would you want to see that happen so they have their input?
I think it's a real disservice to voters when government, this is exactly why people don't trust government. Because government has a history of not being honest and transparent about what they're doing, and they have a history of being absolutely wasteful with taxpayer dollars. If they had put on the ballot how much it's going to cost and what the project's going to fund, who knows what that result would be? And that's all this bill is going to do. It's still allowing the voters to weigh in, but it says, hey, you kind of broke the law the first time that you did this by excluding that very basic information. And so now we have an opportunity to have a conversation as a community about how much, and if we are willing to have property taxes raised 20%, and how much we're willing to spend. That wasn't very articulate, but sorry, I feel like I'm just repeating myself. But
no, it's okay. And that question was kind of repetitive, so no. But
okay.
No, that was well. Well, I do have a question. So Mayor Watson's been pretty vocal. He had a newsletter come out, and he's been pretty vocal about he's not very pleased with the bill, but at the same time, he's also kind of commended the bill on the same token, right, and then explained that he wants to work with y'all, and I know that he's had some conversations in there. I guess my question really is, when you see that, I know that bill talks about, like, not raising when it comes to property taxes and things of that nature. So, how important, this one's hard, because I guess my question is, when you see our mayor here, kind of going against it, but then also commending it, does that kind of prove to you the importance of this bill, making sure that that it needs to be put through? And really, like you said, it just comes down to basic protections for voters and just transparency, right?
Yeah, I think Mayor Watson is doing the right thing by supporting the passage of this bill. He wasn't at the helm of the city when this was passed, so he didn't have an opportunity to weigh in about what that original ballot language said. This time, I'm sure he's going to make sure that it is done correctly. And some could look at this and say, you know what, this bill might be doing Austin a favor, because if it truly was illegal the first time, I'm not sure that the Attorney General of Texas would approve the issuance of those bonds. So the bill, I think, from Austin's perspective, there could be an argument that could be made that this actually helps give them the solid legal ground that they need to move forward with the project if and when voters decide they want to pass it.
My last question is, I think the original estimates were around 5.8 or 6 billion or so. And I think now it's obviously ballooned up into that 10 or over 10 billion. I did speak with, officials at Transit Forward who say that simply also comes down to things like inflation. What would you say to that? When they say that essentially like $5 billion has just come up just because things cost more. Of course that exists, but do you feel like even if that's the case, it still should be brought up yet again for voters?
Yeah, I mean, I think the original estimates that were talked about in the media were 7 billion, which honestly is an insane number to begin with. Again, we're talking about a 20% increase in your city property taxes. So that's the number one thing I hear about is people frustrated with the cost of living. And I think it's important for people to understand that this will be a major cost driver and they will be paying billions of dollars through their property taxes if this project is approved. But despite the fact that the original price tag was 7 billion, the latest estimates are up to 12 billion. And that's before we've even moved a single piece of dirt. So, of course, inflation impacts us all, and there are protections in place, as there always have been in bond elections where there are changes in cost. But come on, almost doubling the cost before even beginning the project. It's really, really disrespectful to the voters to come back and assume that they would be willing to pay that when people are struggling to keep up with our property taxes to begin with.
Well, Representative, I appreciate it. Is there anything else that I missed? I know it was quick, but I know the bill is working its way up. And, is there anything else you want to mention that I may have glossed over?
I don't, it can get a little bit in the weeds. So I want to give you accurate information that is in a nutshell. I think so I don't know if you want to use this or not, but the city has created a separate entity, and they're claiming that that entity is not subject to the same laws that the city itself has to comply with. And that's just simply not how our taxation laws work. You can't create another entity and give it taxation superpowers that the city doesn't even have to comply with. So what the bill does is says, if you're going to create a local government corporation, you can do that, but they have to follow the same laws of the city that creates this. This is just basic common sense, good governance, transparency, and accountability. And I don't care which side of the aisle you're on or what your stance is on Project Connect. We should all be on the same page of being honest and transparent with voters when we're talking about their money that we're going to spend. And that's what House Bill 3899 would do.